Welcome to the Black Father's Pulse, the podcast where fatherhood meets purpose. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas, clinical psychologist and professor, here to guide you through the multifaceted journey of Black fatherhood. Please note, the views expressed here are my own and not those of my employer. But get ready to dive into the dynamic world of Black fatherhood, where we celebrate the highs, tackle the lows, and share plenty of laughs along the way. Let's keep the pulse of fatherhood beating strong and vibrant. Welcome to the Black Father's Pulse, and today we're talking about something that could change how you raise your children. We're diving into emotional socialization. Basically, it's how fathers teach their kids to handle emotions and other challenges. And I've invited two colleagues and professors whose research and experiences are a perfect match for this conversation. So let me welcome them to the podcast. Dr. Deon Brown from the University of Houston studies parental emotional socialization and how African American fathers teach their children to handle emotions, especially considering our unique experiences with race and identity. His research is proving scientifically what we've always known about Black fathers' contributions to emotional development. Conial Caldwell from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, is literally flipping the script entirely. As a race and family scholar, he's moving away from the deficit based research to highlight the resilience and strength that Black fathers bring to their families. His work amplifies our voices and challenges misconceptions through real stories and lived experiences. These two are about to flip everything you know, or at least think you know, about being an emotionally present father. Gentlemen, welcome to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Dr. Brown, let's start simple. What
Yeah,
exactly is emotional socialization and why should Black fathers care about it?
great question. Emotional socialization, I always like to define it as the messages that parents send their children about emotions. That can usually be categorized in three popular ways: discussion about emotion or conversations about emotion, responses to negative emotions, and then just simply modeling emotion expression or children observing the way the parent expresses their emotions. And Black fathers should care about it because it plays a big role in child development. Not only emotional development, but I think just all around um, cognitive development, academic outcomes, and performance. Um, I think raising an emotionally aware or intelligent child is an extremely important task, and I think it's needed today more than ever. That's why Black fathers should care about it.
Thank you so much for that. You talk about how raising an emotionally intelligent child is an extremely necessary skill and something
Yes.
that fathers should be taking up. How do Black fathers teach emotions? And are they doing that in a way that is different from other families?
Yeah, great question. I think in some ways it's similar. Um, there's some work that suggests that compared to mothers, fathers from different ethnic groups are more likely to respond to their children's negative emotions with quote unquote non supportive responses. So
Mhm.
things like punishing or minimizing. Um, but then in some ways, I think it's also different. I think a lot of times we dichotomize parental emotion socialization. So it's either supportive or non supportive. And I think for fathers, particularly low income Black fathers, a lot of times those practices may combine, and you might see some affectionate practices, which is typically considered more supportive. And then you may also see some discipline that could be considered non-supportive depending on the impact that it has on the child. But I think the ways that Black fathers are engaging in emotion socialization, I'm interpreting it as challenging the ways that the field typically categorizes or boxes in these types of
Mhm.
parenting practices. And then remind me of the second part of the question.
Second part is, does this look different
Yes.
across different types of families or
Yeah.
even ethnic
Um,
groups?
yes, absolutely. I think for African American families, The processes of emotion socialization and racial socialization are often in tandem and often integrated. And so some of the practices or messages that Black families may send about race, they might double as a emotion socialization practice and vice
Mm,
versa. And so Black families have that added layer of not only am I trying to raise an emotionally intelligent child, but I'm also trying to make sure this child is safe in America and that they're not too expressive in the wrong context because
mm.
there could be some negative consequences for that. And Black families want to protect their children from those. So, yeah, definitely
No,
looks different for Black families.
thank you. So, Dr. Caldwell, over to you. Your research focuses on flipping that script from deficit based narratives. What are we getting wrong about Black fathers and emotions as far as what your research is showing?
I think that what we're getting wrong is what we have historically gotten wrong as it relates to
Mm,
like Black men in general. The negative stereotypes of Black men as being angry, violent, hypersexual, those type of things. So it's not countered, but it's also depicted in how in other mediums, that goes out to the public. And research suggests that within television and film and other media platforms, they kind of like encourages those thoughts and perceptions of how we view certain people and things. So throughout history, you have those negative depictions of Black men. I think that plays into the psyche of everyone, even within ourselves.
mm,
So that's not the case because Black fathers are shown to be friendly. Research has shown that Black men show up and partake in the caregiving, so not just being a financial provider, and
mhm,
that's whether they're within the household or non-resident living outside of the household. They actually partake in the parenting practices, whether it's giving baths, helping to read, playtime, and things of that sort. So I think there's an issue with how public media and even with some of the deficit-based research that we've seen out there, things without much context to the lived experiences of Black men and Black fathers. In my work, it's important to be able to counter those type of things to show like, hey, look, Black men are emotionally available, they are emotionally present. And I think also oftentimes there's this when we look at Black people overall, we're
mhm.
always comparing them. It's always a comparison to the dynamics of white families, but the history of Black families, especially Black fathers, have been impacted by social conditions. And so there's like my dad was present in the home, but he wasn't
Mhm.
emotionally available. I think that's most men who come from like the baby boomer generation,
Right.
some of those older generations where men were hard present but hard and lacked emotions. It's just not like a Black dad type of thing. And emotionally, Black males' experiences are often different than some of those lived experiences of other groups. So it may cause us to be present differently as it relates to emotions. Not saying that we don't have those emotions, but the way that we express them may look or appear differently than other ethnic groups. Oftentimes, we're not given the space to be emotionally available or present in the same ways as other groups of people.
I know a lot of your work looks at popular media and depictions of Black families and Black fathers. I also know you just had a recent op ed in the Baltimore Sun. What is the message you want people to take away from that op ed? What is the message you want to give to people regarding the popular media representations of Black fathers, even along the lines of emotion and emotional intelligence?
Well, it's kind of like what we're discussing now, like in terms
Right.
of Black men and their experiences being fathers, the lived experiences. As scholars, as researchers, we can publish this work, but oftentimes it's not picked up by the masses. So it circulates within our academic space.
Mm,
But most people come in tune with different media every day, whether it's through social media, Instagram, memes, and some things that may be jokes or whatnot, and we may take it lightly, but that still plays into the psyche of people. But then we also have different mediums like television and film highlighting those positive depictions. We know the history of Black men being identified or typecast as a thug or criminal or the hyper masculine or the player type, but there's also a history of Black men being within the family unit. So I think it's important for those to exist,
Hmm.
to counter some of those negative things, and not saying that one is better than the other or these
Right.
things don't exist, but we've seen that narrative play out. But what does it look like to be? Just should be more representations of fathers, especially Black fathers, being within the household, being non-resident fathers, and actively engaged in the lives of their children, to kind of show that this is a lived experience for Black people. This is something that does happen, so that people can almost like Blackish. You know what I'm saying? I don't like the
Hmm.
like, some people don't like the show Blackish because it shows this
A positive Black
affluent Black
family.
man. Some of
Yeah.
those issues that they talk about may not be relatable, but
Right.
it's still palatable or digestible for some of us who may not have come from those affluent families to say, if this is an experience that I had growing up, it's an
Right.
experience that I'm having now. And so when engaging with other people who may not be within the community, they may be able to say, if I saw this thing that popped up on Blackish, let me talk to you more about it. Or
Right.
this may, I can view you differently, or not as, I don't have to be as fearful, you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Or anxious, or I may have a little bit of understanding. And so maybe I can engage with you a little bit differently based on the positive things or some of the other things that I've seen,
Mm.
such as, oh man, how do I help care for my daughter, and she's a darker skinned girl and
Mhm.
going, so that may not be their reality, but they get to see that depicted on film, and it's like, oh, as a Black male, you have to raise a daughter to love herself.
Right.
How those are conversations that are actually happening within our household that the public or the masses could kind of see. So I think those depictions are extremely important, not
Uh,
just for them, but also for us.
to kind of normalizing the our existence.
Right.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Calder. Dr. Brown, so this is a more practical and an application type question. Um, so assume that a father is watching or listening into this podcast, and help us with this particular situation. A father is watching his son get teased at school for crying.
Mm.
How does this Black father handle this moment differently?
Differently. Um, well, I think a big key in handling it differently is taking a step back, because I know I'm not a Black father myself, but I can
Mm.
imagine that as a Black father, that protector role kicks in, and you like,
Mm.
hold on, who's making fun of my son? Like, all right, see, I need to talk to somebody. The key in handling it differently is maybe taking a step back and allowing their son that space to voice and name what's going on. There's also this dynamic where, as a Black father, you may know that, like, hey, if I immediately step in for my son, that's going to be perceived a certain way
Yeah.
amongst his peers. So it's like, um, kind of navigating that dynamic of, okay, I want to create this space for my son to express himself to me, but I also don't want to strip him of that autonomy. You want to take a step back, allow them to express themselves and name what's going on. A big key in father relationships, um, is kind of giving the child that language to name what's going on. Teasing might be the behavior the son is experiencing, but what feelings is that bringing up for you?
Mm.
Um, Encouraging their son to name those feelings. I know that experience in itself among peers, among boys, may be a little intimidating, because it's like, well, how are my peers going to even respond to me naming my feelings? But I
Right.
think encouraging their son to, if the teasing is not becoming physical, like it's nothing physical going on, but it's just verbal, is encouraging their son to name those feelings and express that to their peers, and even show their peers that, hey, like, as boys, we have feelings as well, and I'm responding to this. I don't appreciate the way that you treated me, or the way that you made me feel. You made me
Mm.
feel this way. And then allowing their sons' peers to see that, seeing how they respond, and kind of going from there. Like I said, if there's a physical aspect that's coming into play, and it's more than just teasing and more than just verbal, then that type of approach may not work the best. But I think that's a start for them, is helping the son to practice naming their emotions and naming their feelings with their father. And then also being able to have the language when they go back around their peers to say,
Mm.
hey, I don't appreciate that. And if it's more serious, hey, we're not doing that. Advocating for themselves and practicing boundaries.
So that sounds like something that happens or starts to happen not when that child turns 10 or 16. That's something
Yeah,
that happens from as early as possible. So this kid goes into
yes,
kindergarten with some of that language and some of that advocacy skills at a developmentally appropriate age stage.
yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Um, and I think one thing I was going to say was I think that's important for Black boys and men because of some of those stereotypes that Dr. Caldwell was speaking to. We don't always embrace our feelings and or even embrace like practicing boundaries for ourselves
Mhm.
because it's like there may be some stigma around even naming like, hey, that's uncomfortable for me.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think you're absolutely right that it starts early. And even just thinking about some of my work with fathers of toddlers. In one of my studies, they were thinking like, hey, my children are too young to be sending these complex messages about emotions.
Right.
I think it's also important to acknowledge that you could be laying the foundation
Yeah.
as early as that period, helping them learn what they're feeling, acknowledging that hey, they are starting to have increased emotional skills and that you can be cultivating them. And I think that it's important that that's not limited to mothers. I mean,
Mm.
it may look different in different families depending on the roles, but it's not limited to mothers to cultivate those emotional skills in your child.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Caldwell, kind of going to that same situation with the father who is seeing his son affected emotionally and otherwise by bullying or teasing. Could you speak directly to that father who was told boys don't cry growing up? What would you say to him about raising his own son? His son is coming home or is at school crying about being teased, but the dad grew up knowing that boys just don't cry. Like you handle your business, whatever that means. Like but you definitely don't cry. Don't let them see you cry.
Yeah, I think that culturally within our community, many of us have been raised to if they hit you, you hit them back, or you do it in a way where they know not to bother you, right? But then even with looking at how Black boys are targeted within the school system, so like suspension rates and disciplinary rates are much more
Mhm.
higher for them. But also, like Deon was saying, was like, man, the protective factor jumps in is like, hey, I don't want nobody messing with my son. If they do, you respond in this type of way. But I think that raising an emotionally intelligent person kind of prevents the crash out, so to
Mm.
speak, right? And so you can bottle it up for only so long until it comes to a head and you crash out. And so it's best to kind of like go through those steps almost like parents are, kind of like some of us receive, hey, look, if this thing is happening, let me know. That's the first step. Then after that, you let the teacher know,
Mm.
right? And you continue to let people know so that if it comes to a point where you have to handle your business, it's already been notified that this bullying has happened. You've taken the steps to kind of like prevent what's occurring instead of just crashing out or behaving in a way that's going to cause issues for yourself but also ultimately for the family, so I would say in the same way that we have formal or informal training when it comes to emotional socialization or racial socialization, you have to teach and model what that behavior looks like and how, if you're feeling this thing. First, let's talk about the feelings. Let's talk about or identify key players or stakeholders that we can communicate with before there's like a action, right? So the first action is identifying those key stakeholders that you can kind of get something done. But then after that, we'll figure it out or handle
Mm.
it however we can handle it. I think that's easier said than done oftentimes, especially
Yeah.
within our community. And oftentimes you don't feel like the stakeholders have your best interest or are as resourceful for you in the same ways that they are for other people.
I want to repurpose that spotlight on community and stakeholder investment in our young people, in our children, and talk a little bit about this subculture that's developed and is continuing to develop, the YNs and crashing out
Yeah.
subculture. Um, Just yesterday, I think it was late last evening, I saw this video that was going viral. It's of a 16 or 17-year-old African American young man who is all over social media now. He was on Instagram last night, crying and talking about his challenges of being homeless. So he says he's been homeless for about a week. There's nobody to talk to, nobody to express what he's going through, nobody to provide him guidance. There's no space mentally for him to explore what he's going through. He doesn't know where he's going to sleep. Every day he wakes up, he has to think of what he's going to eat, where he's going to eat, where he's going to sleep, if he's going to be safe. And there's not enough time in that day to both explore that and explore who he's about to become, what he could become. So that story that was shared, and hopefully there's some help that comes from that
Yeah.
story that was shared by this young man, the advent of YNs and crash out culture makes me think that there is something that we're missing, that maybe the stoic, you got to bruise them to make them learn. You have to squeeze these kids. You have to be blah, blah, blah with these kids. What's called again? Gentle parenting. Maybe what we think is working is not working. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it from the point of view of African American kids or Black kids and emotional socialization.
Man, so well, I'll start like crash with the crash out culture. I think about that a lot, man. I think
Mhm.
that you know, for us, black males, we all come from different places. There's different cultures within the places that we come
Mhm.
from. And so though we may not have been I think crashing out has always kind of been a thing, but it may not
Right.
be as crazy as it may be perceived as now. But it were times where it was, and I think that I've grown up with so many people who have crashed out so early that now on the back end, um, we're able to compare our lives coming from the same place.
So, Dr. Carter, before you continue, maybe because I'm thinking to myself, you know what? There might be some people on here, age-wise and otherwise, who might be like, "Crash out? What's this crashing out thing is?" So, if you could
Okay.
just very briefly tell us what crashing out is, and then go back to your
So
point.
I would say like engaging, like going off, diving off of the deep end and behaving or engaging in some type of behavior or activities that are like physically violent or that can get you incarcerated, whether it's attempting to harm someone, threaten someone, or actually committing that act, right? And so with
So, it's
myself, it's
wildly aggressive, wildly violent in
right,
response to some
exactly,
situation.
right, right.
Okay.
And so I think that for myself, I'm always going back to the influence of television and film. For me, it was the Cosby Show and how that was like, oh man, these kids live in this house and I'm living how I'm living. I
Mhm.
want to get to that point in life. And so kind of trying to figure out how can I live in that type of comfort, and crashing out wasn't a thing, you know what I'm saying? And so now I think crash out culture is almost like cool because people are rapping
Yeah.
about it. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? It's seen in
Yeah.
television and film, and there's already this as black men or how we're reared, and not just by the men and women within our household, but how society is raising us not to be soft, not to appear to be weak, to be emotionless. You're almost rewarded in a way because the toughest
Yeah.
person normally gets the girls, you know, people admire him, so to speak. And but looking at it now, it's like I'm so grateful that the times I either wanted to crash out
Mhm.
or the crash out wasn't a full crash out. I'm able to be in this space or in this capacity, whereas I have some of those friends or people that I've grown up with who've crashed out and never see the light of day again, or the lives that they want to live is kind of hard because
Mhm.
of criminal background, or the crash out caused them to do some time or be incarcerated and things of that sort. So I think crash out culture is promoted and it's appealing,
Mhm.
especially now. I think that it's more appealing to kids who don't even come from environments where there are crash outs. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And they engage in those activities and behaviors because of this, is perceived as cool
All right.
or whatnot. I
So,
don't know if that even answered your question, but those are the things I was thinking about as it relates to the crash out.
Dr. Brown, I'll come to you in a little bit. So I'm hearing that crash out is both an identity building activity. I want to be seen as being part of this subgroup or culture. And so I crash out within limits to allow me to be part of it. But it's also a coping mechanism. I want an immediate fix to something that's causing me frustration. It might be that somebody said something about me online and I'm going to shut this down immediately. So I find you and I shoot you. It's a crash out. It ends the situation, but it has created a whole new situation, a lot bigger than I was hoping for. Or you say something or you do something, and I see you at school, and the next time I see you, it's on site. And we
Yeah.
start scrapping, we start fighting, and I get expelled, or I get suspended, or I get arrested. And so my crash out addressed my current situation. It was an immediate release for my current situation. But because of where I am cognitively as a younger person, I
Mhm.
often am not able to appreciate the long term effects, the long term trajectory of my current initial crash out. The number of times I've seen videos of kids who crash out, and then you see them 2 or 3 years later in their court case getting the sentence, and they're like, wait, what? That was possible? Five
Mhm.
life sentences is possible, and you just got it, and you're 17 years old or you're 19 years old. Your life is almost pretty much over.
Yeah.
Um, and it feels like we as black fathers, as and talking about father biological fathers as well as father figures, social fathers, that we as black fathers are behind the curve in that conversation around emotions with our kids, with the young men and women that we're trying to support and nurture, that they're down a path and we're still chasing them down, trying to catch up with them to give them the skills, the emotion coping skills. That's kind of where my mind was going as you were talking. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Brown, to talk to us a little bit about this crash out culture, crash out and YNs and emotional socialization.
I had a number of thoughts going from you all talking. One was a line from a Christian rapper named KB, and he
Mhm.
said, "It's easy to crash out. It takes a man to love you." And
Mm,
I think that comes to mind because, I mean, as Dr. Caldwell was saying, crashing out is appealing. People
mhm,
are seeing it. It provides an outlet. And I think that's what black boys and black men are looking for, an outlet. And if they don't have one that's considered healthier, then they're going to rely on the coping mechanism, as you said, Dr. Thomas. And um, the thing that immediately relieves this pressure or this emotion they're feeling. Um, when it comes to YNs and crashing out, I think it speaks to the generational differences. You have this, I guess there's like a pendulum swing. You have the stoic and boys don't cry. And I never had those outlets. And maybe
mm,
if that's me as a father, I don't think that my son should have, you should be raised the same way. And then you have the crash outs and the
mm,
YNs on the other end. That's okay. Well, I may have, I may I may have this experience that I haven't gotten to express yet. And now it's similar to, the older generation of things have been suppressed and now it's bubbling
mm,
over and it's just exploding. And so I think when you pose the question or the idea of like what's missing, it's like their range, their
mm,
full range of emotions and being able to experience them and express them. Because even if you do believe as a father, like, hey, I don't think you should be out here just expressing yourself all the time. Like that's not
mm.
healthy. I think what's most important is to create a space where your son can do that.
Yeah.
If it's not in public and you like, look, hey, I don't want you misrepresenting my name out here and the family out here. I hope that they would at least know that they can come home to a space where it's like, hey, okay, I held this in all day, but I'm home, I'm here, I'm safe.
Mhm.
Dad, this is how I'm feeling. Or mom, this is how I'm feeling. And so I think those are some of my thoughts as it relates to this subculture that you speak of, and also it made me think of kind of like maybe like the juxtaposition between crashing out and cool pose.
Mm,
Um,
yeah,
you know,
majors.
Yeah. Which is that idea of like like as black men maintaining that coolness
Yeah.
and I'm in control and I'm in I'm in demand of things. I
Hmm.
control my destiny. I control my fate. And then again, that pendulum swinging. Like, well, maybe I was trying to stay cool, but it's
Right.
a wrap now. I've reached my threshold, and so, yeah, I think that there's I guess there needs to be a bridge, a continuum, or a greater
Hmm.
range of ways to express ourselves and maximizing outlets for black boys and black men because maybe you do need to crash out in a sense, but there can be a healthy way to crash out. You can go
Right.
to like you can do some axe throwing or a rage room or something. You can do things like that where you crash out in a more controlled setting, boxing.
Mhm.
There may be a need for crashing out in a sense, but definitely not something that you can't recover from.
Thank you very much for that. There's a psychological coping mechanism called sublimination,
Mm,
where we find normal activities that allow us to express what would otherwise be seen as not socially unacceptable behaviors. So it's the 10 or 12-year-old boy who is angry, who is feeling really hurt, who feels like lashing out and can't punch his schoolmate in the face, can't tackle a teacher, but can join the football team and can knock around any and everybody as long as they do it within the rules. So I
yeah,
have this outlet, or I can do wrestling, or I could do gardening, or I could do painting, or I could do singing, or I could do rap. I can finding a way to subliminate, to kind of take what would otherwise be, well, rap and wrestling and these not wrestling, rap and gardening aren't necessarily sublimination. There's a displacement of emotion by something else. But these other ones I was talking about, these are socially unacceptable behaviors, attacking somebody physically. But in this specific space, it is not only allowed, it is celebrated. And so I wonder if that is that this is my mind going on another tangent. I wonder if that's why we have so many brothers in the NFL and
mm,
in some of these other sports because they don't have these other spaces to express some of the hurt that they're feeling. They
yeah,
want to crash out, but there's
yeah,
no space for crashing out. And so the best place to crash out is join the football team and you become really good at it
yeah.
because there's so much to give. I wonder to myself if that crashing out in itself is not necessarily a negative thing.
Mm,
But if crashing out is your only option, if crashing out is the only coping mechanism that you have, then you're in trouble. I don't think people just show up and just crash out. Oh, my toe is hurting me this morning. I'm going to crash out. But if my toe is hurting me and there's no food in the fridge and my mom has been gone for a few days and I don't know where my dad is and I have no clean clothes to go to school and I have an exam that I know I'm going to fail because I'm reading at a second grade level and I'm in eighth grade.
mm,
And I walk into school and somebody says, "Here comes this big dummy again."
mm,
I am here.
yeah,
And all it takes is just and it may not even be directed at me. I overhear somebody saying, "Here comes this big dummy again." And they're looking in my direction and laughing. And I assume it's me that they're talking about. And so before they even say anything, I grab something or I rush at them and it becomes violent.
yeah,
And that's because when all of those smaller stresses were developing and building, I didn't have the outlet valves to let out some of that frustration, some of those emotions. We're talking about how black fathers can provide support for kids and help their children with emotional socialization. But how are schools and our systems not recognizing the emotional work that black fathers are doing, but also not recognizing the work that needs to happen with our kids? These kids who are crashing out are not crashing out from home, they're also crashing out from school. What is it about our systems that's causing it to not recognize both the work that's being done, but also the work that needs to be done among our kids?
So first, that also made me think about value, right? And
Mm.
so sometimes, like when we meet social development, like in some of those developmental stages, your peers have value. Your parents have some value, but your peers also have value. So if I'm not the most athletic, where I'm receiving the value or being respected in that way, the crash out is the value. You know what I'm saying? Like people know that to respect me, people
Mm.
know that I have value because I'll crash out, or it'll be an issue if you play with me, so to speak, right? And
Mm.
so now I'm valued. I'm somebody, and I think that one
Even if
as
even if it's negative value.
even if it's
Yeah.
negative, right? And so I think we have to kind of create as black men, as fathers, social fathers, mentors, whatever. We have to kind of create spaces and places where our kids can be valued, even
Mm.
though in certain age groups it may not be as valued as their uh, the perceptions of their peers. It's still a place where they can say, I'm not valued because I'm on the football team, or
Mm.
I'm not valued because I'm playing basketball. I don't have to be valued because I'll crash out or people know me as a crash out. I'm valued because I have these different talents and skills. And I think that, so I used to work prior to getting earning a PhD. I was a school social worker. And so I would work. And of course, they
Of
placed me in the
Yep.
low performing schools. Most
Yep.
of the student populations are black, right?
Yep.
And they want me. Oh, you look young. You look like them.
You look
You
like
can.
them.
And so um, those schools, especially exceptional centers, I think the system is kind of like working how it's supposed to work, because most of the students who were placed in those exceptional centers or labeled with the IEP or 504,
Mm.
oftentimes it was a EBD, emotional behavioral.
Mm.
And when you look at those kids, you look at the background, they come from poverty stricken areas.
Mhm.
One parent or both parents aren't in the household. They're being raised through kinship care by a grandma or something like that.
Mm.
You look at their history, they've had these traumatic experiences. Nobody's really treating the traumatic experiences. They still have to show up to school. They may not have the best of anything, but their parents or grandparents are doing the best that they have, but I don't have the best clothes or
Mm.
whatever, right? So I don't have that value that some of my peers have. So I have to create that value by being a crash out, or
Right.
being disruptive and things of that sort. And within those schools or those neighborhood schools that are poorly funded, that are largely Hispanic or black, there aren't the same level of resources. Some of these schools may not have the same amount of athletic teams. They may have no programs at all, but then we expect these kids to actively engage in pro-social activity, and you don't even model that or provide that within a school setting. By law, you're supposed to do that. Everything that,
Right.
if they're in emotional, or if they're in a exceptional center, they're supposed to have the same opportunities and resources as those students that are in the traditional school setting. And oftentimes it's not. Sometimes some of those staff or faculty that are within those school settings, they see you not for who you are,
Mm.
and if they know that there are issues that need to be worked on, they don't have the resources to be able to provide to those students. So I think the system is working how it's supposed to, how it's designed to kind of work.
Right.
Even if people were to say it's not designed in that way, will explain why. We're talking about the school to prison pipeline. Most of these kids are targeted, and the suspension rates are higher, but then the performance, academic performance levels are lower. Why aren't there any additional extra funding or resources going into these schools? So um, I think we just have to do a better job overall with education, especially educating Black youth. I think one of for me, this didn't come later in life, but the value within me came from learning about people like, you know, Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois, and sitting back thinking later in high school, like, man, like I could do better than what I'm actually doing, because these people came
Mm.
from harsh circumstances in terms of enslavement, and I'm out here not fully taking advantage of some of the opportunities I do have. Even now, with them removing African American history from schools or AAP classes, like how do you provide values when you're devaluing or removing something that my community values? Like, you see no value in it. You don't see any value in me, unless football team, you know what I'm saying, athletic. those type of things. So that's the value. And if I'm not that, then I don't have any value, and I have to engage in other activities that's not going to be, going to promote me to, get me through high school and hopefully to college or a trade school. My issues are going to come way before then, because people aren't identifying the issues that's happening with Black students, or especially Black males, that stem from community or home trauma.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that schools and just public context may be missing the emotional labor that Black fathers are engaging in is by assuming that they're not engaging in
Mm,
that type of labor, and maybe
yeah.
only involving mom, and that may be a challenge involving fathers depending on residential status, depending on uh, living arrangements and things
Mm,
like that. I think that's an important thing that not only public context, but also like researchers, as we're trying to engage Black fathers, is like, hey, we're going for primary caregivers, or we're just assuming that, the mom is going to be doing most of that emotional labor, which may be the case, but I think it's important to recognize that Black fathers do contribute to this process. So I think that's one of the ways um, that the emotional labor that Black fathers are doing is being overlooked. Um, I think another way when it comes to like schools and public context, to build on what Dr. Caldwell said about value, is whether schools value Black culture in the ways that emotions may come up for Black children, and also just like Black brilliance in the ways that
mm,
Black children are engaging with educational content, and how cultural values may show up in that context. I think sometimes there's some cultural mismatch. And just thinking about some work that I've done around Black adolescence and in public context, thinking about what defines a emotionally inhibiting space versus like an emotional promoting safe
mm,
space, or like quote unquote like safe space.
mm,
Uh, Black children need to know that when they're in schools, that like, hey, if I express myself emotionally, I'm not just going to be perceived as a threat. And with some of those factors that Dr. Caldwell mentioned, they're automatically being perceived as a threat. There may be some suppression of holding it in, or the crashing out and the disproportionate discipline, and that leading to a number of effects. And so I think about that in terms of how schools and public spaces can be more accommodating, if you will, of black children, and showing the appreciation for Black cultural values, and that showing up.
okay. Thank you so much. Towards our final question. And essentially, what I want you to do, each of you, in about a minute or so, give us some hope. We kind of moved from fatherhood into YNs and crashing out. All I keep seeing in my head is these young people who are going around shooting each other, killing each other because the ops or the opponents have said something about you, or you just don't like them for one reason or another. And you're killing young people and destroying their families, or young people are killing you and destroying your family, disrupting your family. And it's just this really toxic space that our young people have kind of stepped into. What gives you hope about the next generation of young people and Black fathers specifically, and their approach to emotional development?
Man, what gives me hope is seeing, like, especially with young people, seeing how they're actively engaged socially and politically. It may not be in the same ways that, in terms of marching and things of that sort, but using their mediums, whether it's social media to kind of address things, but also the creativity, and not looking at the traditional ways to generate some type of income or opportunities for themselves. And especially like with Black men doing this, Black fathers doing the same things, is
Mm,
recognizing the importance of emotional intelligence and being present, not just physically or as a provider, but showing emotionally.
yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot of that in so many different programs, whether it's not just the traditional donuts with dads type of
Mm,
thing, but more so jogging clubs where they're jogging their kids within their strollers and things of that sort,
mm,
or you know different apparel with the dad gang. People are taking pride in being fathers. I think
Right.
that's extremely important. It's like a different generation of black men, and it may be due to the awareness or people being able to see it more that black men are not just doing it alone, but they're joining groups with other black fathers as it relates to figuring out fatherhood. You know what I'm saying? So those are the things that makes me hopeful.
Thank you.
I think what gives me hope is the youth who are looking for an outlet, as we touched on earlier. The fact that they may be attracted towards the crash out culture lets me know that they're looking for an outlet.
Mm,
We have to kind of redirect that
yeah.
energy, those emotions somewhere else. So it's like they want to express themselves. I think also just a number of different organizations who are doing work with black fathers and black men and who are
Mm,
challenging traditional conceptions of masculinity and providing spaces for black men to talk, to have discussions, whether that's barbershop talks, whether that's community talks, fatherhood support groups. I think there's a number of community organizations who are noticing a need, particularly emotionally and mental health wise, and they're providing that. And I think also just building on Dr. Caldwell, a generation of fathers who are determined to be there, right? Like when you ask them, a common thing that I might hear is like, my father wasn't there for me, so I'm determined to be there for my child. Um, and
mm.
that determination can be built on to explore what it looks like to be emotionally available. Maybe they do think of it as just one way, but then we can build on that for them to learn what it looks like to be present emotionally.
Great. So we've come to the lightning round. It's the quick fire question section for both of our guests. I have 5 questions, and I'm going to ask you not to explain 5 questions, your lightning round response to it. What is the biggest misconception about Black fathers and emotions? We'll go with you, Dr. Caldwell, first for this one.
Non-existent.
Non existent. Dr. Brown.
Only negative.
Only one emotion that Black fathers need to model more.
Sadness.
Hmm.
Joy.
Hmm. The best age to start intentional emotional teaching.
Newborn.
Birth.
How do you handle your own emotional triggers as a father or father figure?
Journaling.
Hmm.
Therapy.
Hmm. I feel like I should have been answering those questions myself too, but yeah, let's go. Complete this. Emotionally intelligent Black children will.
Thrive.
Thank you very much again for joining us, Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Brown. I feel like the key takeaway from this is for fathers, your emotional presence is not weakness. Vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, if anything, it's your superpower as Black fathers. With regard to crashing out, you want to give your kids more than just crash out. Give your kids space to land on you, to use you as their soft landing spot. Teach them how to understand, express, and manage their emotions. The first step to doing that is doing that for yourself, doing that hard work for yourself. Thank you for listening to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter, on TikTok, everywhere else that you might find podcasts. Our handle is dr underscore at 758. That's doctor underscore at 758. We look forward to speaking with you. Please feel free to share your stories with us. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Black Father's Pulse. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Views shared on this podcast are mine or that of my guest and are not associated with the university. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva, artwork by Isabella Acra. The podcast is produced by me and is supported by the kind contributions of you, the public, and advertisers. Follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758, that's Dr_AT758, or the Black Fathers Pulse podcast on Instagram and YouTube. Subscribe to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast wherever you do your podcast listening, and don't forget to share and leave us a positive review.